Welcome back. I'm going to try to solve some puzzles today, taking a break from my study of the Philidor position, which is honestly just wearing my brain out. So I'm going to do some puzzles, and we'll see how far we get. Okay, we made it to 1304 last time, and we're going to see if we can get any farther this time. Okay. Do I have any checks in this position? I do have checks in this position, but I think that one is fairly easily refuted. However, if they capture with the pawn, I would have a follow-up check here. Queen captures e6. Which I guess they could block with the rook, but I have another rook back here that could capture with check. Another option I thought of is this, queen taking h5, but that's not a check. The pawn is pinned by these rooks, but so it can't take, but it's not a check, which I think would allow this if I got my queen off of this rank first. And I need to be careful about that. It wouldn't be mate immediately, but I think it would be pretty close. So I would, I think if I move my queen off of my second rank, then it needs to be with a check, like there. So that is what is leading me to think that rook captures g6 check is first. And yes, it does sacrifice the rook. That's not the only legal move, however. I have to think about what possibilities there are. The king could move to one of those squares. Now, if it did, then this would be mate. Queen captures h5 would be checkmate, because it would be protecting the rook as well as leaving the king nowhere to go. So, if we start with that again, the king won't move, I don't think, because again, queen over here would be mate. So that leaves the only other legal move to be this pawn capture. And there we could follow up with another check with the other rook. Or we could go here, and I just have to decide which one of those is best. So if we start here, pawn captures back. I think the other rook next would be best, and this is my thinking here. Because if I do that and then follow up with this queen move, I've gotten the queen off of this rank down here, protecting my b pawn, which is in danger. And the king moves out of check to the side. And then I would have to be really careful with follow-up checks. So that's why I think after my first rook capture here and the pawn captures back, I think my second rook capture is best. Because then if the king comes this way to get out of check, that's mate. Queen to e6 is checkmate. And if the king goes to either of those squares, then this would be checkmate. So that's why I think first is the rook capture on g6. No matter if the king moves, then that's mate over there. But if the pawn captures, then I go with my second rook. And then I have mate on the next move with the queen, either here or here, depending on where the king moves. Okay. It took me a second. By a second, I mean a couple of minutes. So we only got 5 points for it. But again, I wanted to be right. And I had to eliminate all the possible pitfalls of that situation. And one of the pitfalls was leaving that pawn undefended if I went too early with the queen. And the other pitfall was, of course, taking here with the queen on the second move rather than with the other rook. All right, next puzzle. Okay, now we do know that not all of the next moves are going to be check and checkmate. That's often the case, but not always. So sometimes it might be just a piece for a pawn. And that might be the case here. But first I want to follow out the possible checks. I have a battery lined up behind this bishop. The bishop is currently in the way of this nice little battery that could do stuff down here. But even if the bishop were somewhere else, say the bishop was over here, I wouldn't be able to checkmate here because that square is guarded by the queen and by the king. However, and my thinking is that I could check first with the bishop over here. And not only does that open up my battery, which is one of the goals here, but if the queen captured, that would take the queen away from defending this rook, in which case that would be mate. So I'm very seriously considering bishop to f4 check, but the queen capturing isn't the only option. The king could move out of check. Now, if the king moved out of check, it would not be defending this anymore. So either way, it's removing a defender from that square. So if the king moved, then I would check here. When the queen captured back, then I would check with my rook, and that would be mate. Okay, so but what is the any other options besides the queen capturing, besides the king moving? The rook could block, but if the rook blocked, again, I would capture here with my queen, and that would be a check. And the queen, their queen is not guarding, because their queen is guarding that square. Their queen isn't guarding d2. So the check with my queen would force the king over, and then I would move my queen back here. Then they would be forced to capture with their queen, and I would follow with the rook. So I think that's our first move. I think we have a mating sequence here, and it's not going to be capturing the free piece. Okay, now this is just going to be mate, I'm pretty sure. Okay, because what we had two enemy pieces both defending that rook there, and whether we moved the queen off of the square or the king off of this square, we ended up removing a defender from that rook, I think was the key to that puzzle. Let's see, what do we have here? We have a few checks, but we are down on material. We only have a queen, a rook, and a knight. Our opponent has that, plus another rook and a bishop. So they're up 8 points of material, and I haven't even counted the pawns. Their pawns are a little in disarray, and their king has been apparently forced out into the middle here. And they have pieces that haven't yet moved, so that may be in our favor. So I want to look at the checks. We have a check here on h5. We also have a check here. And I mean, really, we have a check with the knight too. I just don't think that one is that good. So the question is, which check is best? I'm going to start with the one that I think is not that great, which is the knight check. And that one is, I think, is not that great just because the pawn recaptures and we still don't, and that opens up their queen. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to remove the piece that's keeping their queen from getting over here and blocking these checks, I think. So let's go to the next most powerful piece, which is our rook, and say rook to f8 check. They can't, well, I mean, they can legally block it, but we would just take that. So they can't effectively block it. But they can't move out of the way over here because our queen guards these squares. Our pawn guards here. And of course our rook would be hitting these as well from f8. So that would leave the king only one legal move at that point, which would be to e2. And we could follow up with the queen check on h5. Or we could follow up with the queen check at that point here. And if they blocked with the rook, both of our heavy pieces would be attacking that square. So I don't think they would block with the rook at that point. They would only have a couple of choices, both of those. And either one of those we could follow by capturing the rook. And I think that would be checkmate. So we're going to start with our rook. And then we're going to not check here. We're going to check down there. And the difference is, if we check on h5, their king has that move. the king can go to e1, and we could follow it up here, but then they would just move over, and we don't have a good follow-up. I think our best follow-ups are here. Now, the queen's going to be able to block. I just noticed this. Once we capture the rook, their queen is going to be able to block. So should we capture the rook with our rook then, instead of our queen? I think we should take with our rook, because then their only legal move would be to block, and we will win their queen for the rook. Okay. As a matter of fact, we wouldn't even have to win their queen at that point, because then their queen would be pinned, and we could have checked here, and that would force their king back, and then we would take the queen for free, and it would be checkmate. Okay. Next puzzle. It's probably pretty obvious that I'm going more slowly now than I did in the few videos right after I reset my puzzle score. When my puzzle score was 400, when I first reset it, I was just solve, 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 solve. But now it's taking a little more time. Now here, my opponent is about to promote, but we have, and they're going to promote with check. That's an important factor here. If they were just going to promote and our king was, I don't know, safe, well, not there, but you know what I mean, safe from any checks there, maybe up here, it would be a little different story, because then we could make a waiting move of some kind or a preparation move. But because it's going to promote on the next turn with check, protected twice on that square, I think we need to start checking now. Now we have a pretty attractive check here on e6. And of course, if the king moves, the king can't go here or here because our pawn is cutting off those squares. So if we check on e6 and the king goes to the right, we would have a mate here by moving our rook over to the h-file. They would be forced to block with the rook, and then we would take it, and that would be mate. So I don't think the king will move over there. I think once we check on e6, I think the king will move this way. And then the question is what to do after that. Do we have a follow-up check at that point? Oh, we do, because we would win the rook, and that would come with check. And then we would be guarding the promotion square of that pawn. Not that that would make that much difference, because they are defending their promotion square twice. Okay, so let's say we check here, and I'm pretty sure the king would come this way. Then I think that's our only viable check remaining. Then the king would have to come out here, because it would be too far removed to go the other way. And then we would have to figure out our next check, and I don't know if it would be taking this pawn or bringing the rook over, but I think that's got to be our first move. Okay, and it did come this way, so we were right about that. I don't think anything else makes sense other than capturing this rook, because we are down in material. That would put us back up a little bit, although this pawn down here threatens to become material. Our other checks don't look good. For example, checking from here, the queen, I'm sure, would capture us. Checking from here, I think the rook would capture us. Even though we do have a pawn guarding that square, that's giving up a queen for a rook, and when we're down material, so that doesn't make sense to me. And again, we don't have time to make a waiting move or a preparatory move like putting the rook down this way. That's too slow. So I think we have to take the rook. Okay, and it went up to where I said it had to. Now here, I said we had the choice of taking this pawn with check, moving the rook over here, where it would be protected by our f-pawn, in case the queen wanted to capture it. That might be better, because if we went here and the king moves again, and we end up having to check with our rook at some point. then we wouldn't be guarding this square anymore. Also, if we check by taking the pawn, when the king moves, the rook is pointing at us. So if they moved back, then our queen's in danger. We have to move our queen. I mean, we could go back to where we are, but very few of these puzzles have repeating moves as the solution. That's why, that's a couple of different reasons I don't think that's the best move, queen taking b7. I think third reason is that the queen continues to cut off squares on the back rank, as well as this one, and the pawn's cutting off this one, and the queen's cutting off this one. So if we check here with the rook on e3, that's only leaving one possible move for the king, or the option of capturing with the queen, in which case they lose a queen and we're still guarding this with our queen. So that's why I'm leaning toward the rook check. But I mean, there are other possibilities. I can check with the queen on c5, for example. But again, then the queen is no longer cutting off those squares on the back rank, and the king can just go back there. So I'm going to try the rook check. Okay, that was it, and they did take it. Okay, I don't think anything else makes sense other than capturing here, and then our queen is guarding this square. Okay. Well, that puzzle was rated 1496, so we are getting into slightly higher levels of puzzles, and because it's taking me longer, I'm getting fewer points for each one. So this puzzle might not get to as high a level by the end. This video, I might not get to as high a puzzle rating as I did in the last couple of videos. And that will probably be the case from here on out. But at least I am getting them all right so far. Right, this is very interesting. I think we are even on material. I have an extra pawn on the king's side, and they have an extra pawn on the queen's side. But we both have two rooks and a bishop and a knight. So, do I have any checks? I do. That doesn't seem... That's not a good check, right? Both the pawn and the rook are guarding that square, so I don't... Wait, yeah, that probably is it. Because this rook's undefended. So, I'm learning slowly that when there are undefended pieces, there's different kinds of undefended pieces. There's the ones that are just sitting there that can be taken. Like if my knight wasn't here, then I could just take this rook. It's a free piece. That's one kind of undefended piece. Another kind of undefended piece is the one that's not currently under attack, but could be if I could safely move this knight somewhere. But if I move this knight, say here, then that rook would just move over, I think. Or the other rook would go back to protect it, or it would move out of the way, or it would take my rook, or something like that. And of course, there's the type of piece that is defended, but you can remove the defender, so I don't know. They're different types. But this one looks like the second type, where I can move the knight here with check. And whether they take it with the pawn or the rook, then I have a free rook coming up. But they have to deal with the check first. So that's got to be the solution here. Okay, they went to protect the rook, leaving me my knight. I think the solution here is to go ahead and take the rook, because they protected with the king, and the king would then be in check, so it would need to take. And then I would put my knight here with check and get the other rook for the knight. And then I would be left, let's see, they would be left with no rooks. They would be left with a bishop and a knight at that point, and I would be left with a rook and a bishop at that point. So I would be ahead in material. My only question, I guess, is, like, should I try something like this to draw the king away from the rooks so where I could get that for free now? But I don't think that would work. I think if I did that, I think they take my rook, and then I have to take back, and then they get my knight. So I think I have to take the rook now. Okay, and then I fork here with my knight, and win the other rook for the knight. Okay, that was it. And I was just, wow, basically getting rid of two pieces, but winning one exchange. One was an even trade, rook for rook, and then winning the exchange, knight for rook. Okay, I understand that. All right. My queen is in danger, which it wasn't before that. Why didn't they take it? I mean, obviously the first move of the puzzle is often a blunder, but it seems like that was a pretty obvious one. Why else would you have the bishop there pointed at my queen if you weren't planning on taking my queen? Nobody knows. I guess one reason they didn't want to move the bishop is because we're planning on advancing this pawn, but then the king would just get in front of it, and we don't have a light squared bishop. So the question is, should I move my queen? And I think that I should. If I capture this, I am threatening their queen. I'm just picking up the knight for free. Okay, we're down a piece now, aren't we? We're down a knight relative to our opponent. If I capture this, that equalizes its own material, but then they have two pieces pointed here, and that makes me nervous. Oh, they've left their rook undefended, though. Wow, I was too slow to see that. Is it just taking the rook? What do they do if I take the rook? If I take the rook, they could try to fork me here. That knight would be hitting both of those squares, well, and this one too, for that matter. But that would leave their... If they move their knight, then I win it with the rook, right? I think I just take the rook. Oh, they forked me here. Well, then if I take the knight, they get this. But I'm in check, so I have to do something. Do I protect the rook? No, I can't protect the rook because then that would be really close to mate. So I think I have to take the knight and give up my rook, don't I? Okay, I didn't see that coming. If I take the knight, I am threatening mate. But first they will win a rook. And I will move out of check. And then what would they do? I don't know, but yeah, because I think if I move over, they just get the rook for free. And then I have to run. And then they go here, and if that's not mate, it's really close. That's what I thought they would do. And now I only have two legal moves. I'm just going to guess that it's this one. Okay, well then I have to take now. I mean, I can move out of check, but then they win my queen for free. Okay. That was pretty complicated, and I didn't always expect my opponent's responses, but the fact was we began one piece down and we ended one piece up. And we do have a protected, or at least a defended passed pawn that the king has to worry about blockading while we go around harassing it with our bishop. Okay. Oh, and I got 9 points for that. I don't think I solved it fast enough to get 9 points. Oh, well. Let's keep going. Just lost a knight, I think that was. However, I have a check over here on h5. And then when the king moves out of check, if it moves here, I would have the follow-up check in there. And then the king would have to come back. And then that would be mate, would it not? What if the king goes here first? Then that's mate immediately. Okay, it went there. I have to force it out of there, and I think I have to do that with this. And then this is checkmate. Okay, oh, and I did that quick enough to get 12 points. That encourages me to keep going. Our opponent has a rook. and 3 pawns, and we have 4 pawns. I think in an actual game I probably would have resigned by now, unless it was bullet or blitz and I was trying to win on time. Okay, but apparently this is a blunder that gives us some sort of advantage. However, every now and then there's a puzzle that just wants us to draw. I had one of those back when I was 2200 before I reset my rating. And it threw me off because I thought I was looking for a win of some kind. But anyway. Well, the good thing about in-game puzzles is we don't have very many pieces to worry about. There's not that many options. This pawn can't move, so that's not an option. That simplifies things. This pawn can't move, but it can capture. So that is one option, is to take the pawn. Which seems reasonable. What happens if we don't take? If we do something else? If we don't move either one of these pieces, I assume the opponent's next move will be to capture that pawn with their rook, and we will be in check. However, they don't have a lot of backup for those pieces and pawns, so I think we could safely move out of check. Their king can't come up here to protect the rook because our pawn is guarding that square, g5. So I think maybe we don't have to take. Another option, though, is that they could push their pawn and check us that way. But in that case, we would move over to f3, wouldn't we? We're not threatening the rook because their h-pawn is protecting the rook. But then we've blockaded this pawn. And if they further checked us, then we could just capture the f-pawn. So I don't think it's necessary that we take. I think we promote. We aim to promote. And then if we move our d-pawn 1 square forward, we're 1 square from promotion. And if they don't deal with that quickly, we're in trouble. However, if we do that, and then they check us here, and we move out of check here, then they get behind our d-pawn. So I think when they check us, we have to come over this way to keep them from getting behind the d-pawn. So my guess is we move the d-pawn. Moving the front e-pawn does not make sense at all to me because they would just capture it and restore the balance to their pawn structure. Instead of having doubled pawns, they would have a protected pawn. So moving that doesn't make any sense. Capturing with this makes a little sense, but not a lot. I'm trying to think what they would do if we did that. I mean, they could also capture this pawn. That's one available option for their next turn. Let's see. If we move the d-pawn, can their king get there fast enough? No, it cannot, because their own pawn is in the way. If we played the d-pawn to d6 and this pawn wasn't here, they still couldn't get there fast enough. So the only way they can stop this is by somehow getting their rook over here, or down here. Okay, so those are the only two moves that make any sense to me, and I'm very not sure about which one it should be. But I think I can get out of it if I push d-pawn here, and they either push this, and then I block it, or they capture here, and that's not check, and then I promote. Or they capture with their rook, and then I get out of check this way to keep them from getting behind my d-pawn. Okay, that was it, and they did take there. And remember, if I go to my right to the F file, they get behind my d-pawn, and it's all over. As it is, all they can do is take this. If I move over this way, which it has to be. Okay. And I only got 5 points for that one, and we're getting close to 30 minutes, but let's go ahead and do one more just in case. Oh, wow. Really complex puzzle. Okay. I would have mate, I would have mate there if not for that knight. Is there a way to get rid of that knight? What can I do about that knight? Well, I could go here to distract that knight, but then I wouldn't have mate anymore because I need my knight to guard that spot. Um, oh, I can get rid of the knight this way. Is that it? What happens if I capture that knight with my bishop? What do they do? Because then I'm threatening mate here. Can they stop it? Okay, I got 13 points, but we're past 30 minutes now. So thank you for watching. And as I mentioned during this video, the points will come more slowly now that I'm getting into slightly higher rated puzzles, building my rating back up. But it was important for me to go back through these lower rated puzzles because I was stuck at the higher rated puzzles and frequently taking far too long to solve them, missing a bunch of them, not learning anything, and needed to work my way back through these. I probably need to do that more often, probably every time I get to a point where if I'm just stuck for even a day or two, I should probably reset and work my way back up. At least that's the way I'm thinking right now. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.